So if you measure in Bitcoin instead of converting to a piece of paper, you see the truth in the world, right? My house has fallen from 300 Bitcoin to 22 Bitcoin in the last 4 years.
Most public companies ended up with less Bitcoin on their balance sheet than they had 4 years ago. So what do you think that smart mining companies do differently?
How could you grow forever on a finite planet by manipulating money and have that not burn the planet? Inflation equals climate change. 8 billion people on the planet that aren't really a part of the economy. Their minds aren't. Their labor is. What are we missing? How many Einsteins? How fast would the productivity rate actually increase in a true free market?
All right. Well, today, thrilled to have Jeff Booth on the podcast. Jeff is the best-selling author of The Price of Tomorrow, Why Deflation is the Key to an Abundant Future. Jeff is also a founding partner at Ego Death Capital and serves on the boards of Core Scientific, Fedi, and Breeze, and can't wait to dive into his insights on technology, Bitcoin, and the future of money. Personally, Jeff was an integral part in my journey, and his book and his podcast appearances early on played a major role in me shifting my full-time attention and energy to the Bitcoin space. We had a chance to meet for the first time this year at a conference in Portland, where he literally blew the lights out with his keynote and actually shut the power down to the entire block because he was moving so much energy through the room. So Jeff, really appreciate you being on and coming on to the Abundant Mind Show.
Yeah, no problem at all. And it was that Portland event and meeting you and the group there. That was actually, it was a smaller event, but it was just such a powerful event. It was really great.
Totally agree. Did not have conference vibes at all. A lot of signal, a lot of great value. But anybody who's finding us at this point has probably already listened to you at least once or twice. So I don't want to take too long on things that people have heard you say more than a few times. So since we've only got a limited time, I'd love to start with how your focus, how your perspective, and how your kind of philosophy on investing into the space, both with your money, your time, and your energy, has changed since you wrote the book about 5 years ago.
Yeah, so when I wrote the book 5 years ago, I knew Bitcoin could be a path, but I actually didn't. So I actually saw a kind of a 5% probability of failure of Bitcoin when I finished the book, or in writing that book, probably when I finished and released the book, I still saw that. And so it was only trying to disprove that kind of and fight that and say, where were vulnerabilities? What did that look like? Where I came to first, the base layer, there wasn't, the chance of failure was so much lower because of the way that it was designed. So I had to, probably very similar to most people going through this journey, I disbelieved something and then believed it stronger and stronger and stronger by trying to kill it. Instead of just standing in a space of disbelief, I tried to where were the vulnerabilities, and through that process became more and more convinced that this was. I don't even, when I think about Bitcoin, instead of saying Bitcoin first, I say an open, decentralized, and secure protocol bounded by energy. Because the thing bounded by energy will tell you the truth, and the thing bounded by pieces of paper will not, right? And so that's how I think about this process, and then I think about all of the risks and the centralization and what that looks like, and then through that process, as I came to realize, I realized we were the risk, and the greater we, because we give our attention to the world that is extracting from us, and that we and I was the risk in Bitcoin by doing that and pricing in a derivative instrument that there was a US dollar, essentially converting Bitcoin to a piece of paper to be able to transact to the world, and thinking Bitcoin's going up in price. So I realized that the true risk was us. The risk was the nodes changing the protocol. The risk was to be able to centralize. The risk was us in using the piece of paper to transact in the world. And by the way, this was an entire journey to getting to this, right? So it just didn't magically happen, just like it doesn't magically happen for anybody. Then I wanted to move my time into this to create the future, essentially bend reality, bend the future of the world to where I wanted it to go. which was uh, a system in service of 8 billion people, in service of each 8 billion people. Um, and I know for people just starting their journey, many of the people who are listening to your podcast aren't just starting their journey, right? So they would be deeper. But when you really understand what that means, you're not going to stop, right? You're going to do everything to move there, and 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 I realize that two things can be true for people at the same time. If you're measuring the world from the piece of paper and you think Bitcoin's going up, that would look true to you, and you would reinforce your belief, and you'd take leverage against that, and it'd be just but that would be a centralizing function because the system has to centralize because it's against the natural order of things with the free market being deflationary. But I understand that can be true from a perspective of people wanting Bitcoin to go up versus their piece of paper. But my perspective is also true, right? And my perspective of a protocol bounded by energy, as long as it stays decentralized and secure, heals our world completely. And as the abundance flows to us. And so I don't yell at people that are doing the other thing because I once did it too. um, I just think about kind of the process of which scenario would I want to live in the world, and I would want to live in this scenario that we've never seen as a species before, where the free market is in service to us and we are all in service to it, making it better and better for all of us instead of this extractive system. I know I said a lot there, right? But that's how I think about it now and how I've come to think about it. And then if you said now, how does that impact kind of our investment philosophy? If you just said this simple thing, then relative to the piece of paper, then Bitcoin's IRR, internal rate of return, for the last 15 years is 45%, right? And I suspect it's going to be the same 45% for the next 15 years. As the piece of paper, essentially the thing people are measuring Bitcoin from, the piece of paper, is debased, right? But also what you can't, what the more important IRR, because that's the IRR relative to the piece of paper. The more important IRR is how fast prices are falling against Bitcoin. All prices. So if you measure in Bitcoin instead of converting to a piece of paper, you see the truth in the world, and all prices are falling, and they're falling even faster than that rate on all things that you would purchase, right? So house prices are falling faster. All of the energy prices are falling faster relative to Bitcoin because of that. So how do you beat that rate? How do you beat how do you beat the rate that's instead of just holding Bitcoin? And by the way, this is really complex, right? Because we're used to measuring the world from the piece of paper, and the energy, base energy on the protocol is now measuring the world, right? And you can prove it. And people are asking, when does it happen? Well, it's happening, right? My house has fallen from 300 Bitcoin to 22 Bitcoin in the last 4 years. And then next 4 years, it probably falls to 2 Bitcoin. So every single thing is being repriced by Bitcoin, and people are asking, when is it going to happen? So now how do you beat that rate? I've done a lot of thinking on the only possible way to beat that rate is to invest in companies and protocols on top of that are aggregating Bitcoin on their balance sheet by providing value to this expanding protocol and network. And so the companies that are providing value on that is how you beat that rate. You're building Bitcoin balance sheets from building it onto this new protocol.
So you're talking about how when you're thinking about making investments in this space, there's the paper hurdle rate of, outpacing inflation, but really we've got a compound growth rate within Bitcoin that if you're trying to invest in this space, you're having to make decisions against the performance of Bitcoin in relation to everything else. So how would you make decisions with that frame of reference? It sounds like a much harder hurdle to clear.
Yeah, it's a harder hurdle to rate because the paper hurdle rate of Bitcoin for the last 15 years is 45%. For the next 15 years, I suspect it's going to be 45%. But the real hurdle rate is actually probably higher than that because the real hurdle rate is pricing all things relative to Bitcoin. So, in other words, a free market is deflationary. Bitcoin's because it's bounded by energy and decentralized and secure, and you can't change it. The only thing that's measuring true free prices is Bitcoin. And so the hurdle rate, you have to be able to beat Bitcoin in whatever you're measuring it from. Other things, if it's a currency, or the piece of paper, if you're measuring from the piece of paper, you have to be able to beat that hurdle rate. And so I think the only possible way to do that is to invest in companies that are creating value on top of Bitcoin and then denominating their balance sheet in Bitcoin as a result. So they're actually in time selling for sats and creating more and more value and more balance sheet in sats. And then those companies become almost utilities if they're big enough because it's the only way to. It's one of the ways to create more, get a share of the success of the companies in Bitcoin. Now the question comes on top of that: what's going to? Some of those companies are going to fail. So, which companies, and in venture capital, typically, they have some companies that do extraordinarily well and some that fail. So, if you're trying to beat Bitcoin in one company or investing in if you're just kind of putting money, spreading it around the system, you could do that, but that would be a really hard way to beat Bitcoin. I think you have to have a discipline to be able to understand what actually can create more value on top of this network by expanding the network. And let's just use some examples. I wouldn't invest in a wallet and why wouldn't I invest in a wallet? Because the same thing I talk about all the time, prices fall to the marginal cost per production. And a wallet, that means has to be free. And because it's just the technology around that wallet, and so many people will create wallets of all millions of different variations, which is very good for all human beings to be able to have lots of choice, but it's really bad as an investment philosophy, right? So a calculator app I use every day is very good for me, but not a very good investment. So similar. So you have to understand which are the types of investments that could outperform. They outperform by essentially building the rails to be able to make this simpler and easier for billions of people to move on. And what I think, if it's capturing what before we had the technical outage, but if it isn't, I'll say it again. You're actually bending reality to the vision of the future that you have by creating a pathway for people to see what they couldn't see before. What it's coming. So those are the things we're investing in, and it's just wildly exciting.
So, what you mentioned earlier about a protocol that's bounded by energy, here to heal the world, I mean, that's near and dear to our hearts. I think that mining is a vehicle that is bounded by energy that can heal energy systems in many various ways. But as you said, Bitcoin is the hurdle rate that we have to overcome for it to be worth doing. So, unless we can outperform Bitcoin, we're in the wrong business. So there's some companies that have, but most public companies ended up with less Bitcoin on their balance sheet than they had 4 years ago. So what do you think that smart mining companies do differently that is going to make them successful and have a potential of outperforming Bitcoin?
Yeah, so that is such a good question, Bo, and I hope we can clear up some of this in kind of how this operates through that question. So, because fear and greed drive markets, and Bitcoin, kind of the long term, is the energy into it and the mining compute against that. You can, as everyone's liquidated, and then Bitcoin goes way up in price because of the mining's liquidated. Then those miners that are remaining mint money, right? But as they're liquidated, as miners are liquidated, that's going to happen right now. Like we're in that process right now. all of the machinery that they bought also is liquidated, and there's prices you just get to keep on falling. And actually, Bitcoin goes through this process of having a hard time kind of accelerating because all the miners are selling everything they can, the kitchen sink, to try to stay in business to the time where other miners fail. They can be profitable again. And the opposite side of that is true too. At the top, everybody's racing in because everybody's making money. That creates the cycle again. So there's these massive whipsaws in the cycle and mining, and through that there's liquidations everywhere, and naturally there'd be liquidations everywhere because people are doing the same thing and they're all racing for the same bet, and they're paying way too much for energy for the next cycle, and they're kind of locking up long-term energy. Some miners right now have long-term contracts of energy at like 8 cents, when the hash rate and stuff, if you're not at 3 cents, maybe 2 cents at the next cycle, you're going to be killed, right? And you might not be killed if there's no other miners and everybody goes broke before you, but you can't count on that. So what does that mean for really great miners? They and the operation of a miner has to be exactly counter-cyclical. You have to sell when everybody's buying, and you have to buy when everybody's selling. And because it's opposite to the incentives, because most people can't do that, because when everybody's buying, especially in a public case, those companies are rewarded for their future growth. You better keep growing at this rate, and they're buying too. Right. So it's so having an operator that thinks like that, uh, it just doesn't happen very often in markets being counter, because essentially what it says is you're going to have to leave some money at the top to be able to watch the froth and then collect it as it goes going down the bottom to be able to make the next top, right? And that's a really hard operational challenge in a world that's filled with fear and greed.
It makes it where, to Warren Buffett's quote, you've got to be just buying hand over fist when there's blood in the streets.
Yeah,
And it's a hard sell for most people that haven't wired themselves to see these cycles. And
yeah,
we thankfully, our co-location clients understand, and we've done I think, a good job educating them up front that when the economics are really stressed, you should not be selling your coin. That's exactly the time that you should be doubling down, because you're typically this 6 to 18 month period post halving is when you get most of the gains for the cycle. So exactly when it's painful to be allocating is exactly when you should be. And maybe a follow-up question to that would be, when we get to that point where it's frothy and everybody's raising money to buy ASICs, and people think mining is a great thing to get in at that particular time, are you a proponent of miners selling their equipment to roll into Bitcoin, or is that one of the rare times that you actually take a fiat denomination?
I'm not sure. Like the kind of the operations inside a miner. Let me talk about core scientific in a different way, and then and where could you deploy, and I'm going to do it from two different fronts to this. So I'll start with energy. So what does Bitcoin actually do with energy? And you know this well, as do many of the Bitcoin miners. I'm going to I'll just use a really simple example. You are a baker, right? And I come in one day and I say, listen, I want to buy all your excess bread at the end of the stuff you throw out, but I want a discount. And the next day you produce 2 times as much, hoping you can sell it, and you can't. And I come in and I buy it all, and wow, he showed up. And the next day you produce 10 times as much, and I show up and I buy it all. The next day you say, wow, I'm going to buy more ovens, more capital cost, right? I'm going to hire more people. I'm going to build 1,000 times more bread. And I come in and I buy it all. And so through that free market force of having somebody always buying your excess, you create all the capital costs to create and growth in your business, create abundant bread. Now just insert energy for bread. And that's what a Bitcoin miner does. And there's a constant competition to be able all over the world to chase the lowest cost energy. So you're creating abundant energy by having a buyer that's always on, that'll always take up that, and it's a free market force for abundant energy. And that free market force, because it's anywhere in the world at whatever wasted energy, abundant energy is always hitting this planet. We have so much energy. It's the pricing mechanism for energy that's co-opted, right? Because it's centralized. This doesn't care. Go find the best energy wherever that energy is, excess energy, and you could place your Bitcoin miners anywhere, and you're creating abundant energy and money from that. That's what bounds this to energy, and it doesn't care. You might, if you're pricing that energy too high, because you're going to get liquidated, but Bitcoin doesn't care. So that's how it creates abundant energy. But because that process measured in Bitcoin is pricing energy lower and lower and lower, that race for more energy is more and more. It's more and people are pricing their energy in a fiat denominated instrument, and they're getting and some of them are getting killed, and they're pricing energy too high. So that's going to keep happening from that side, and it will have abundant energy on this planet as a result of Bitcoin. The other side, because that's such a competitive market, then as you create this energy, you need to move that energy to higher uses of energy. Right. So what Core Scientific has done is they've created the Bitcoin mining in exactly the same configuration that high performance compute, AI compute, needs to be able to move to utilize that. And that high performance compute has to be able to run these models, at least train the models, is just an energy hog. And because at least today, the economics are there, everybody's investing in it, and we're going to talk about that too. They'll sign long-term contracts, crazy long-term contracts, fully funded to be able to secure the energy for their needs. So you move your energy from high-cost centers where it was Bitcoin mining to trade it for people who will pay way more, and then you take that money and you take your Bitcoin miners and you chase lower cost energy. Now you have now you have a barbell strategy in your company. On one side of it, you're selling energy to the highest bidder of energy, and then on the other side of it, you're creating abundant energy. So what will happen to AI compute? AI compute right now, you have a massive bubble. And you have a massive bubble, just like the bubble that's happened in for money. This will be before their time, but the broadband beneath the internet, 360 wireless, and all of these broadband companies that were laying the fiber for Wi-Fi way before it was needed, and they all went broke. Everything went broke. But there was a time that they were worth billions and billions of dollars of value, and the amount of money that was flowing into them for the lay of the broadband on the growth rate of the internet. But everybody did the same thing. So you do this massive overcapacity, everybody goes broke. So what's happening in AI right now. And now if you talk about AI, prices fall to the marginal cost of production. What's the cost of a line of code created by other lines of code? Zero. So how do you make money from it? And so if you're paying that money for the massive money going into AI that you can't make money from, or you certainly can't make the money based on energy costs on where they're going now and what ends up happening, then that whole thing in time, I can't tell you when, but it explodes. Because you have this overcapacity, same thing that happened in broadband. And so what will happen with that is those centers, those giant centers for AI that NVIDIA is doing, Microsoft's doing, that needs this energy, that is locked in these contracts, and they have to pay these contracts for the next 15 years, right? they're locked in. They're going to be giant sinkholes hurting their financials for that time. Well, all of the new people, including those companies, try to get lower cost energy. Whereas the lower cost energy is decentralized around the new Bitcoin. New Bitcoin created energy, and it keeps on happening forever. So if you understand kind of the structure of markets and how this fear and greed plays in, and then you can understand what this looks like, you can be ahead of all of these paths. And why core has done so exceptionally well in a market for like when I joined that board, it was set up for failure again. It was set up and they the debt loaded on it. It was set up to go back into bankruptcy again. But because they've done this in a way, and they thought about this, and the management team is exceptional there. They thought about this through this lens, and created a strategy to do it. Um, then then I would say they're the leaders of that new strategy in the world, and their entire team to be able to operate that strategy is like second to none. So and then if you look at the performance since they've come out of bankruptcy and what that looks like, not only did they not go back into receivership, if you look at their performance, no wonder it's second to none.
So to restate that, it sounds like if you were wanting to be successful far into the future as a quote Bitcoin mining company, you may not even call yourself a Bitcoin mining company at all. And this is kind of the approach that we've taken as well. As we do offer, machine sales, miner sales, and co-location hosting to people, but we think of ourselves as a power generation infrastructure and compute hosting business where
Yeah, you're an
Bitcoin
energy
mining
company.
is
Yeah,
your pioneer species to go and set up uh, a location, a way of making money in the interim so that you can build out infrastructure, knowing that there may be another highest and best use in the very short to medium term for that same infrastructure, as long as you've got a good resource at the bottom of it.
right. You're so on the Bitcoin mining side, what you're doing is it just if you even if I look across Africa, I'm an investor in Gridless as well, and if I look across Africa, how do you create energy? The cost to create energy when you have to wait for everybody to pay energy and hook up all those people, that the capital cost gets amortized across all of those people, and you have to charge them more. So if you're creating new energy by having somebody that's always on that will pay for the energy, and that lowers the cost of everyone else, which then people pay more for the energy, and the Bitcoin or miner goes on. So it literally Bitcoin, it doesn't. It's not the thing creating more energy, but it's creating the economic incentive to build more energy, and it's global.
So, in your view, if we said that our stated company mission was to lower the cost of energy for all the consumers in the Pacific Northwest, would you say that that is aligned with developing more
100,
Bitcoin mining?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So what you're doing is, and that's why when you look at energy policies today, they're so outrageous. And when you look at the centralization or the green initiatives, and we're burning the planet with it, they are so misguided. Because from that system, if you said we're going to centralize energy, make bad economic choices with energy to have less energy so we can grow forever on a finite planet by printing money, how do you solve any of the problems that you're talking about from that system? But if you're from that system, and you're a politician trying to make political points with a whole bunch of people who believe in climate change, then that's what you're going to say because they believe it. But it is couldn't be more misguided. It's exactly the opposite that brings prosperity and abundance for all humans.
I think one of my favorite things about being in the Bitcoin space is that it's a bunch of resolved paradoxes and ones that are really tough for people to grasp unless they've done their homework. So on the mining side, for example, most people have never heard of demand response, but just being able to turn off and avoid the highest cost or the highest pollutive energy sources is a huge benefit. But what confuses people I think often is it's very counterintuitive to say by using more energy, we make it cheaper for you. People
Yeah.
automatically think you're using more energy, therefore you're taking what I would have available. But maybe talk a little bit about why that is not quite true.
Yeah, what we already did with through the bread example, right? You're creating abundant energy by having somebody chasing kind of at a low cost that funds your capital cost to create abundant energy. And without it, your capital cost is magnified over, and you don't create it because you can't pay for it. And so it's exactly the opposite. At the highest level, like even before that, that creates abundant energy. But at the highest level, you just have to resolve this paradox. You'd say, how could you grow forever on a finite planet by manipulating money and have that not burn the planet? Right? It's so you could simplify what I just said to inflation equals climate change or environmental degradation because it says I'm going to burn every resource on the planet by printing money so that people have to work harder and harder and harder to keep up with the rate of manipulation in the it's completely against physics. It's completely against the and where everything that we take for granted today came from a scarcity. Our brains, and why? Because in the free market, anything that goes up in price creates margin, which entrepreneurs attack to create abundance. Everything, right? And the ability for us to find things, all of our minds creating new ideas to create abundance and attack scarcity. There was if Malthusian, and he thought the world's going to blow up because we can't feed people. But that didn't happen. All of these things don't happen because the thing that creates the scarcity creates the abundance and solved by the free market because there's more resources. And the only thing that stops that is regulation to protect the monopoly. There is no such thing as a monopoly in a free market. So when people are looking at the giant food companies and pharma companies that are polluting their food to make them sick, and those are all and they're all regulated monopolies. That all of the money funded to do that is from the same regulation designed to scare you. And no wonder you have kind of 5 different companies controlling the world in all of these places. Now, who do you think the politicians are elected by? And who do you think the CDC it gets? And where do you think the funding comes from for the research studies that you're reading to say that's a good thing to put seed oils in your food? It's all of these things are the same thing. They all roll up to when the money is broken, it all consolidates at the top. And all of the interactions underneath it make it worse, right? So how would you extract more money from people, have them believe that climate change can be solved from that same thing? And we're going to regulate that more to manipulate money, and it all consolidates more, and the biggest monopolies get richer, and people get poorer, and the outcomes are worse. They get more scared. They vote for more regulation, which again, regulation protects a monopoly. And simply say this: you have massive regulation to protect your money from a system designed to steal your money.
I'm going to preface this by saying I'm not against renewable energy development by any means, but I think it's a huge example of what you just described, where there's a ton of waste or margin that entrepreneurs can attack and find a way to actually make use of. And I don't think people understand that when they overbuild renewable capacity, how much of that actual energy gets wasted and completely unused, and the bill for that, the bill for those construction costs, come directly to the taxpayer through subsidies.
And then because that can't be repaid, and that tax that is a drain on the free market, and you have to misallocate greater and greater capital into that thing, or manipulate greater and greater capital in that, and essentially you cause the very thing. Again, you could simplify all these concepts because people are so locked into their belief system on that concept that they can't. But if you just said, think about honestly the thing you care about most, whether it's energy, whether it's the fossil fuels and the burning of the planet, whether it's politics, whether it's anything that you care about the most that's stealing your time, right? It's extracting your time and energy as you fight it more. And honestly, tell me how that problem can be solved by manipulating more pieces of paper. And you'll see that your problem gets worse, and a lot worse. And once you understand that, you realize that the resolve for that paradox, just like you said, that's the thing you like about Bitcoin. It resolves this paradox. And it's just a paradox of our mind thinking that there's a solve from the system creating the problem. Bitcoin resolves all of those things.
So, working in a Bitcoin focused venture fund, what do you think makes Bitcoin based entrepreneurs different than, say, other entrepreneurs that you've worked with throughout your career?
Nothing. And honestly, so when I saw not nothing, I'm going to qualify that. So yeah, but when I was first in the internet, I was early in the internet, and I couldn't believe what was possible and what we could create and how most people didn't see it. And then and I still remember talking to my parents, and they couldn't believe I was going to leave my other job or my other business to do this when that was really successful. And like, what are you doing? You're giving all this up and to go do this. But when you understood what kind of the smarts and there was hype cycles, there was everything else too. But what it actually meant, what most people couldn't see, I had to be a part of it. And there was some incredibly brilliant people as part of it, but it got consolidated. It got all of the things that you believed you were doing got consolidated because of broken money, and they just turned into faster centralization. And so we got some of the gains, but most of the gains were sucked from us through mass centralization, and then used against us to create more misinformation, more monopolies, more monopoly power conspiring with government to continue to do the same thing. And so my path through that journey, but you didn't know as you were building technology there that you were part of that, because I didn't know money enough. And that's actually why I wrote my book, because I couldn't square the circle with why prices weren't falling. Because underneath everything, prices should have been falling like exponentially as the rate of productivity increased. So every year people were measuring inflation from 0%, but they should have been measuring inflation from like -5%. And that what that would mean in that world is everyone in the world got richer, even if they didn't work, because prices were falling every year for them. And so I couldn't square that peg from that, which chased me down all of this stuff to understand how the existing financial world was constructed on this manipulation. And it takes your breath away. But once you know, you can't unknow something. And so once you know that, you started adding your time to create a different world, a different world that looks very different from an extractive economy that looks like something that is in service of all of us. And so what makes Bitcoin entrepreneurs different is they know, right? And once they know, and I'm not just the entrepreneurs building profit businesses, but the cypherpunks before I knew, right? That all of this innovation then led to Bitcoin itself. It was like it's 20 years of innovation of different trials, errors, and everything else that then the discovery of Bitcoin. So the people kind of, it's the one person, but it doesn't look like that. That's not the way that we learn. That's not the way. It's all of the initial trials that didn't work, and then an insight that connects it all, that creates something else. And my own learning, same thing. Your own learning, same thing. But once and as you understand Bitcoin, as you're going down the rabbit hole and you put it all together, it's almost like a check valve. You can't go back. Then you go deeper and you can't go back. Then you go deeper and you can't go. But once you're now inside this new system and measuring from this new system, all of the things from the old system make perfect sense. as do all the things in the new system. So what attracts me to what makes those Bitcoin entrepreneurs different, and what makes kind of that, not just the entrepreneurs, but all the teams that are joining those teams, they know full well that their actions matter, and they know that their time matters in creating abundance for everyone. They can do really well. They can do extraordinarily well by creating valuable services for other people. But in service of that, it works in the free market, and so they're all so what you see is just tons of shots on net and ideas that and by the way, the thing I couldn't see before I dedicated my time to this is I couldn't see how many people there were and how many opportunities there were, because I wasn't doing it. Right. I was like very similar to people who were talking about Bitcoin as this thing, but couldn't really see how fast this would move and what this would look like and all the excitement, because I wasn't in it. But now being in it, I actually feel sorry for people that are outside of it, because they're literally, it's true for them. They're measuring a world from a debasing, and it's true for them, and they're getting more and more scared, and they're feeding that fear with more and more fear, and they're spending all of their time kind of getting sucked into that vortex. And I'm living in an entirely different world.
I think I came from a similar kind of pre-Bitcoin jump as you, where my full-time occupation and most of my investment strategy was in real estate. And when I started to unload my real estate, and people would laugh at me at this, when I said I'm going risk off by selling all of my real estate for
Totally.
Bitcoin and Bitcoin related, uh, that makes most people kind of chuckle because they don't understand where that's coming from. But especially when you're managing a fund that's in a paradigm shift like this, that is so counter to what most people organize their investment philosophy around. How do you think about managing risk? Is the true risk just not being exposed enough, or how do you
Yeah.
think about
So to me, the risk-free rate on Bitcoin, and I totally disagree with Saylor on this, but there is no yield on Bitcoin. Um, there is only yield on Bitcoin from the centralization of Bitcoin. There's which, so it comes at a cost that could centralize Bitcoin. I don't think that'll happen, because Bitcoin will be used as a medium of exchange, and destroy that yield. And for people that are trying to gain that, eventually the counterparty risk of that is going to destroy that. So it's a really dangerous place that could, for a time, look really good. Um,
that?
and maybe for that example to really hit home, if you think back in the free market banking days, when you had deflation in the market, but you had free banking and tons of banks. If a bank had 1-to-1 reserve of gold, they couldn't make much money. They couldn't offer you much return, right? But they were super secure. So another bank would come out and say, I'm going to do 50% fractionalized. And they would offer you a higher return. And then the next would do 90%. They would offer you a higher return. And everything gets consolidated against the person that offers the highest return, but it actually has the most risk. And then when you go to try to get your money back, it's not there, because it's been fractionalized, and the yield came from that. Right. From tricking you into consolidating your your money into that. And then what happens? Because it creates a bank run, and a bank run, it expands, and everything it collapses. What does the government do? We're going to protect you. We're going to regulate that. We're going to create the Federal Reserve to be able to do this, to move the problem higher. Right. And so the fear of that, and people's own fear and greed and the market incentives, creates the thing that creates the ability to consolidate it. And the same thing is going to happen at Bitcoin. It will obviously happen at Bitcoin, and people are going to get burned over and over and over again in Bitcoin. Some people might get out before they get burned too bad, but it's really, that game is going to continue to play out for a lot of years. People are going to get burned, and then they're going to get burned again, and they're going to lose their Bitcoin through this process over and over again. And so You could simplify then. If Bitcoin fails as a medium of exchange, it also fails as a store of value, right? Just like gold did, because it means everybody's using the derivative instrument on top of it, which would centralize, and then from that centralization, change the rules. So, uh, so, so you could simplify what I just said in that, but it will be used as a medium of exchange. It is being used as a medium of exchange, and so again, two things can be true at the same time for a while, right? It could look like it's going up in fiat dollars to you, and you could be part of the centralization, right? And it could work out well for you, and you could play this whole thing. But eventually, one day, that's going to not work, and all prices are falling relative to Bitcoin. So I'm in the camp of all prices are falling relative to Bitcoin, and we're investing in the companies that are building the rails to make that easier.
So a good example of this would be when we were in Portland, you had me open up an actual Fedimint where
Yeah.
we could join, and this is a layer two on Bitcoin where you can transfer value essentially with the same cost or even lower cost than a Lightning channel between two people.
Yeah.
So would you characterize that as being different than a centralizing force because of how it's built?
Yeah, so Fedimint is not widely understood right now, but that's exactly it. And but remember, this technology already exists and it's already unstoppable. Now it's early, but but all of the money within it and the communications within it is completely private. Fedi can't see it. The company cannot see it. The guardians underneath those federations can't see it. So it's completely private and secure. So what's the risk? So the risk would be because it's actually not Bitcoin, but it's not a token to Bitcoin. It's not a token like the US dollar to Bitcoin. It's a blind instrument, it's eCash on top of. And what you do is you put your Bitcoin into it and then trade on top of it with complete privacy and security on top of it. I'll caveat, as long as the custodians or the guardians underneath it, the nodes underneath it, don't cheat,
And those
right? So
custodians can be your friends, your family. These
yeah,
aren't banks, right?
yeah. So, but they could be, right? So let's say, so instead of saying custodians, there, say nodes. Like what keeps the Bitcoin blockchain secure is really the nodes. You and I running nodes, auditing the software all the time. So now think of the guardians as nodes, and I could trust five friends or my family as nodes, and as long as three of five don't conspire against me, everything on top of it is private community. No fees back and forth to the Bitcoin base layer, and then anytime I want to come back to the Bitcoin base layer, I just through a Lightning transaction come back down anytime. So it's all interoperable. And then inside that federation, everything's completely private. So now if you're in North Korea and your nodes are outside of North Korea, it's unstoppable. There's no way to find the nodes because, and not only the family nodes, those nodes don't have to know each other. So they're, if they don't know each other, there's actually no way for them to conspire against you. Now, if you abstract that, what that means is you get hundreds and then thousands of then millions of these federations. And the scalability comes from the interoperability of all of these, and it becomes more and more secure. What's the risk? You're in one federation, a massive federation, that five people decide to fractionalize your Bitcoin, and you have all your money there. That would be a really big risk. So, what do you do as a user of this? You either set your own up with your friends, or you set them up with people that you don't know that can't do that, or you set it, or you're in five federations, and every 30 days you create a bank run on on different federations, so to make sure they're fully reserved. And so you can manage your risk in a different way. It's still not. It's still not. I would still say Bitcoin itself in multi-sig self-custodial is the way to go for Bitcoin. But as far as a payment medium of exchange, it's a trade-off that allows that allows unlimited scaling, completely unlimited scaling to Bitcoin without a different token, without anything else, that is already impossible to stop because you can't find all of these nodes. And so in a world, and why this is so important, and we saw the risk of the centralization from layer two years and years ago, because of actions of humans would naturally do that. We've never had a currency. 5,000 years, everything gets centralized over time. And why does it get centralized? Because of our actions to centralize it. Knew you needed to have something else on top of Bitcoin that was scalable. In fact, if you look at Hal Finney's early work and some of the stuff in the bulletin boards and others, they talk about the free banking system on top of Bitcoin, which this is, that brings privacy and free banking on top of Bitcoin. But the risk is some of those federations will fractionalize your Bitcoin. So you have to make sure that the trade-off is that. So, but how do you solve that trade-off? You have hundreds, thousands, millions of these, all interoperable. That is also the thing that governments couldn't attack. It's impossible to attack because you can't find the nodes.
So when you share about moving energy from the old system onto the new system, which is Bitcoin, and we've got all of these layers on top of it, like Fedi, that are going to constantly change and evolve. But the base protocol layer of this new system, do you think there is a such thing as improving upon it, or do you feel like we've hit the perfect incentive structure for what we call money?
Yeah, so I'm very much in the ossify camp, and the reason I'm in the ossify camp now, could I be convinced on certain changes? Potentially. But why I like the process of those changes come really slow with massive us attacking them and seeing is the thing. If you just think of human beings all the time, we always want to improve on the thing that came before. So our name is part of it. And 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 how many people do you know that are actually really, really good at predicting the future? All of the different variables and predicting the future. Because what most people are good at is predicting their present forward, right? And so what they can't keep up with all of the variables, they're wrong. And so they look at Bitcoin Core right now, or look with Bitcoin Core, and they say, well, we need all these things to scale. But they can't imagine that Fedi and Lightning have already done those things that solve just about all of those problems, because they're not using those things. They're thinking through their narrow thing of the thing they want to build. And they can't even imagine that the scarcity of the way that Bitcoin was built forced the scaling with better trade-offs than the thing they were advocating for in the beginning. So why I like the really slow process of those changes is the counter to what I just said, or not the counter to what I said, the derivative of what I just said is, if most people don't know and they can't see the future of their actions, then what they would then they're building huge risk into the base layer failing, and then everything would fail on top of it. And let's use some real examples, like Bitcoin Cash. If you use the same thing that I just said, that it has to be used as a medium of exchange eventually to be able to suffice as a store of value. And Bitcoin Cash with block size and the whole block size war, through the people that thought that, would have been also right, right? But what they didn't see is protocols come in layers, and by being right and it being used as a currency, it would have centralized and failed. So it wasn't that they weren't right, and that it needed to be a currency. It was the way it would be a currency. And you could say the same thing about different tokens that were private. They were right in, if Bitcoin didn't achieve that through a different layer, like Fedimint in this example, then there's a risk that governments would try to find the nodes and shut this down, or use the derivative instrument to the US dollar to consolidate and control this. So they're right in the privacy, but they're wrong in because they didn't understand how protocols develop, and it has to be bounded, decentralized, and secure to energy for the next layer to solve the problem in a more in a way that everything is tethered to the base layer without new tokens and none of this nonsense and everything else. So, because if the coin got centralized, it would fail. It's why would you ever use a blockchain rather than a database that was the centralized blockchain, and so the core thing keeping Bitcoin to be able to build on top of, to build it in different layers, had to be decentralized in security. And it would be the first time anybody had ever on the planet Earth had ever seen something that could solve that together. Because we used to always have to use institutions to protect our rights, but then the institutions got captured. We used to have to use laws to protect our rights, but the laws get changed to support the people who manipulate money. So, because money is subordinate to laws. So this is why Bitcoin, it kind of bounded by energy, that protocol bounded by energy, is so critical, and the nature of the development on top of it is, I can understand. It was the nuance of understanding somebody's need, and not they're a bad person, right? And they're right, but it's going to come in a different form that that the entire protocol, everybody in the protocol wins, and you can't just, that's what's happening. That's what's happening right now. Is every other coin relative to Bitcoin will fail, and you get all of the functionality that people wanted through the different layers on the protocol stack.
So let's compare, because it's an obvious comparison when you're comparing Bitcoin to other crypto protocols, but a widely used protocol that we all take for granted is something like the English language.
Yeah.
So it's just another way of us expressing information and exchanging value is through that protocol layer. If you had to make a guess, 500 years in the future, does Bitcoin look more similar to the way it does today, or does the English language look more similar to the way it does today?
From my view, in Bitcoin, we have just about everything we need to bring to 8 billion people in service of 8 billion people. You don't need to make a change. And it keeps on happening. And so there will be tinkering, there'll be changes. But in that view, if everything fell to its marginal cost of production or utility value, this gets almost philosophical, but it also, so if you said today, we've always lived in an extractive economy. And that extractive economy, we think we're winning within it because we're winning relative to other people that are losing more, right? So if you hold assets and somebody doesn't hold assets, the inflation is wage deflation. Your money isn't getting devalued as fast as theirs, and you're gaining at their loss. And if you extract that around the world, move out of Canada and US and Europe, which are closer to that system, people on the edge in Africa, let's say, are getting extracted from at a way higher level. So no wonder from their vantage point, they would want to get on a boat and move their family to the extractors rather than the extractees, right? So, and that would accelerate. That whole thing would accelerate from that system. We've always lived in that system. We lived in that system when we invaded other countries for their gold and raw materials, right? And they were slaves to us. The British Empire is that, right? And then the U.S. Empire was created by people that could find freedom from that and move their families to create and free markets move faster, they're more productive. So a lot of people moved their time and energy to the more productive market that then got captured, right, by the Federal Reserve and this whole thing we're talking about that then is doing that to the rest of the world. So we've always lived in this extractive economy. What does that mean? It means there's probably 7.5 billion, 7.8 billion people on the planet that aren't really a part of the economy. Their minds aren't a part of it. Their labor is, as they dig out like the cobalt in Democratic Republic of Congo, and they get paid $2.50 a day, so our electric cars work. But they're slaves through a monetary system to that, and just grinding poverty, which they then elect more socialism or more nonsense people that are actually that are put in place by the system trying to save them, right? So that's the way the control structure of the world looks today, and no wonder the outcomes look like that. So now, but again, this is something you can't see, right? So all of the things we reside on top of, all of the ideas that came before us, that created this Riverside Call, right? That creates our ability to do more and more productivity. These ideas came out of our minds in the first place. So you have to ask yourself, if 7.8 billion people are so destitute that they can't be a part of that, what are we missing? How many Einsteins? How many how many people adding their ideas, their tries to solve scarcity in service of all of us are we missing? How fast would the productivity rate actually increase in a true free market where each person could contribute their time and energy to something that was in service of all of us? Because we've never found something other than the free market that allows you to trade with somebody that you don't like, that benefits them and you. So, so Bitcoin imposes this, and it doesn't care if you believe it in it or not. It imposes this. You should care. But it imposes. What's happening is through Bitcoin, that connectivity, that network, that the network right now is a broken network based on extraction, and Bitcoin changes that network, that we're all in service of one another, and that's a massively profound thing that actually accelerates abundance. And for those who already understand it, I know you're deep down this rabbit hole. You understand this. Others do. Others do too. And you want to contribute your time to the honest network, and it accelerates again, and it accelerates again. That's what's happening.
So I think you'd agree with me that this is something that's quite a bit bigger than any of us individually. But I'd love to know, what do you personally want to leave behind with your efforts in this space?
I want to be careful that this doesn't. So I'm a node, right? I'm just like everything, and I actually cannot tell you. You want to think it's you, right? You want to think it's okay. I did these things, and your ego makes it. But how many people were part of my journey to know this before they were even? And I can't even recognize those people that would be part of my journey. Think about all the people in cryptography beforehand and the cypherpunk revolution to be able to bring this to the insight that then Satoshi found to be able to do this. And I was way later to understand that. And that's actually why I want to kind of put myself behind. Like this is how things change. I'm just one person in this, and my thoughts and of it probably came from a whole bunch of other people that I've actually helped refine and think about. Okay, what does this mean to me? And I have everything I could ever want. Like I could have family, friends. I have everything I could ever want. I don't need more things. So why do I do it? I do it because I just love the people, and I love to see, and I love where we're going with this, and that's all of the people. The even the people that don't agree with this, because they actually make me smarter in actually having to defend my version of reality
Hmm.
and what I see in the world. So yeah, there's what do I hope in this? I just told the what do I see myself in this as just one node in this system that's actually bringing the world together.
Beautiful. I love that. Anything that you want to wrap up with? Any final thoughts, whether it be on Bitcoin generally, projects that you're working on, Bitcoin mining, what should people take away from this?
Just if you took one thing away from this, your words, thoughts, actions make a difference in the world you live. Now, if you don't think they do, that's true for you too, right? But you matter. Every single one of us matters, and you can actually create. So you don't have to wait for somebody to tell you when to do this and when to start spending your time. And if you're spending 2% of your time now, and it's starting to feel better than this extractive world, spend 4% of your time, and it'll feel better again. And whatever amount, and if you don't want to don't don't do it. And nobody's going to judge you for it, but you matter. Everyone does. We Everything around you is created by our brains, creating ideas that in the free market bounce into each other and change other people's ideas, then create more things. It's all us. So, so, uh, so if I had to leave with one thing, it would be that it's your time does matter. Don't let the existing system suck it dry from you.
If people want to keep up with what you're doing at Ego Death or any projects that you're working on, how can they keep up with what you're working on?
Probably Ego Death is the best. Yeah, my email there is jeffbooth@egodeath.capital, but Ego Death is the kind of and if you're an entrepreneur looking for capital in it, I can't say if it's going to be for sure, but we'll look at everything, and if we don't invest, we'll happily point you to somebody who might. And if you're capital looking to get into this, yeah, the Ego Death is probably the best spot.
Beautiful. Well, Jeff, I appreciate you giving another hour or so of your time to advancing the new system. You may think of yourself as just an undifferentiated node, but I'm really grateful for the part that you played in my journey, and many others who you may have just been one key puzzle piece, and being a puzzle piece is enough. So just really appreciate you taking the time and continuing to work at advancing what I think is the greatest impact that we can have as entrepreneurs, capital allocators, and thought leaders, if you want to call yourself that.
Thanks, buddy.